Hey, welcome back to Jesus Up Close, our study of the Gospel of John. I'm Pastor Cary, and this is Growing in the Gospel, and you've clicked into part 10 of the series of the Gospel of John. And today we're moving a little forward in the text because in the original delivery of this series, it was Easter time, so we jumped forward to the crucifixion, and today, the resurrection. We're going to look at the empty tomb. John chapter 20 is our text as we consider the powerful implications of Jesus' resurrection. You get to celebrate Easter early today, and I hope it will prepare your heart for the season that's before us, or whenever you are listening or seeing or watching this video. If you'd like to track the whole series, it's on the playlist, Jesus Up Close, the Gospel of John. For now, let's jump into part 10.
Journey with us, verse by verse, through John's Gospel.
Well, I came across a quote this week that made me think of you. It's by Charles Spurgeon, who pastored in London in the 1800s. He said, "There are pastors in the ministry whose speech is intolerable. Either they bore you to death or else they send you to sleep. In fact, no anesthesia can equal their sleep-giving properties. No human being, unless gifted with infinite patience, could long endure to listen to them, and nature does well to give their victims deliverance through sleep. I heard one say the other day that a certain preacher had no more gifts for ministry than an oyster. And in my judgment, this was a slander on the oyster. For that worthy bivalve shows great discretion in his openings, and he also knows when to close. If some pastors were sentenced to hear their own sermons, it would be a righteous judgment upon them, but they would soon cry out with Cain, 'My punishment is greater than I can bear.'" So I am aware that some of you are hostages today to this service. Most of you are here by choice, but there are some of you that it's like the annual Easter tradition to go to mom's house, big Easter dinner, big Easter dessert, and the price you have to pay is to listen to me, or else mom won't let you come over for lunch. So whatever your reason for being here, I'll try to be a good steward of your time, and I'll try to keep you awake. And if you go to sleep, that's okay. You probably needed the rest, and I'll wake you up when I'm done. Anybody really love science class when you were in school, in high school? Anybody love science class? Our science teacher raises his hand. That's a good thing. So the best part of science for me was lab days. Because lab days, that means you break away from the book and you get to like mix chemicals and, make something combustible, light it on fire. That's always fun. Or maybe those days where you get to cut something open. And it never failed. I got teamed up with some girl that was gagging the whole time we're opening up this little baby pig or this frog, saying, "Poor thing," but to me it was fascinating. A little gross, but fascinating, to see God's creative work and to understand things that I had not seen. Well, today, I'd like us to do a little dissection on the concept of belief. I want us to dissect together in a lab this moment, this church service. We're going to have a lab. We're going to dissect belief. And why? Because John, who wrote the Gospel of John, we're going to be in John 20 today. John is an old man. He's been a lifelong follower of Jesus. He started out probably as a teenager. And he is writing, and he tells us in verse 31 of this very chapter, "These things are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life through his name." So John really is in no way ambiguous about why he's writing these words. I'm not ambiguous to say the reason I've ever given my life to teach this message at all is that you might believe. And so I realize many of you do, and probably some of you don't, and maybe there's others that are just in this mushy middle. But I'd like us to ask the question, what is belief? Where does it come from? How do some arrive at a strong, indomitable belief on one hand, faith in Jesus, yet others seem to arrive at this mushy, indecisive, tepid mental assent in the middle. Like, it's kind of like, yeah, I know about Jesus and God, but it doesn't have any practical value in my life. It hasn't changed me in any extent. And then there's others that are nearly violent about their rejection and very deeply embedded in their deliberate unbelief. It's amazing to me, and it's interesting to study. Now, wherever you are on the roadmap, by the way, you have a right to be there, okay? That's God's design. And I'm not going to intrude on that right except to appeal to you to look at your belief and maybe how you've arrived at it, and maybe look at some evidence that might cause you to consider other belief. So let's break it down. This is all introductory, but the idea of belief has 3 strands to it, okay? Every belief you've ever had is composed of 3 dynamics. And you might want to write them down. Let me give you an illustration though. I believe that donuts taste good. And all 3 of these strands will back up my belief, okay? I believe that there is no better pizza on the planet than there is in the state of Connecticut. Okay. Now see, I hear I've got some skeptics and doubters and atheists in the room, pizza atheists, I mean. But I'm telling you, I mean, I've traveled a lot of places. I've had pizza in Greece, across from the Parthenon. I mean, I'm like looking at the Parthenon, eating Greek pizza, and I'm telling you, I'd rather have Connecticut pizza. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. See? Now, well, I don't want to get ahead of myself. What is this belief made of? Okay? All right, first strand of your belief, any strong belief you have, I'm going to call rational and intellectual. It's the rational, intellectual part of you. It's the reasoning part of you. To say it this way, you came to that belief because there are good, logical, coherent reasons to believe that. Okay. It's important when we talk about this that you know, and we agree on this, when it comes to the biggest questions of life, where you came from, why you're here, where you're going, who you really are, what your purpose and truest value and meaning is, none of those questions, those are the most important questions of life, by the way, but none of them can be answered empirically by science. None of them, okay? Well, you say, what about evolution? Evolution is a theory that science cannot prove, okay? So it starts with a presupposition, there's no God, and then it has no place else to go. So evolution is of necessity the only alternative. But it cannot be empirically proven. The biggest questions of life cannot be empirically proven, but nonetheless, that doesn't mean faith is always blind or stupid or foolish. Doesn't mean you throw your brains in the trash can. No, you reason through stuff. We all do. You have logic and you have powers of reason and you assemble the facts. You look at the evidence. For these empirical questions, you look at the evidence. And it's philosophical generally and historical and experiential, lots of other things. But you look at the evidence and then you arrive at a conclusion that you think, well, I think that's true. Okay. In that thought of truth, I believe that the first strand is rational, intellectual. The second strand I'm going to call experiential and intuitive. This simply means that when you try that belief on, when you put it to practice, when you begin to walk in it, your experience matches your logic. So, if I say to you, Connecticut has the best pizza, and you don't believe, but you're like, okay, I believe them enough to try. So I could send you to a few places here, a few places another. You come back and you go, wow, you're right. What happened? Your experience reinforced what reason told you, okay? This is true of everything. Every belief you have, reason, experience reinforces, matches, it fits your experience. The third strand of belief, I'm going to call social and community. And all that means is you've found a community of people who have had the same thought flow, logic flow, information flow, came to the same experiential conclusion and agree and reinforce to you that they have had the same experience that you are having or that you have had. The scary thing about today is, and I've talked to our church about this, truth, objective, rational, intellectual truth has kind of fallen in the streets because we've made truth subjective and it's kind of your truth, my truth, whatever you want to be true can be true for you. And so if you want to believe anything, all you have to do is decide you believe it, then you Google it and you find a community that believes it. Like if you believed you were hatched out of an egg, you probably can find a community that believes they were too, or a community that believes they're trees. You can be a tree if you want to be. So that's what's weird about today is truth is so mushy and it's so subjective to our emotions and whims. But we're talking about objective truth. We subject it to our reason, our experience, and then inevitably we want to be surrounded. We want to immerse ourselves in people that understand that same truth, and we embrace it together, okay? You've had this experience in weight loss programs, exercise programs, the development of your career, the learning. You've gone to communities that will reinforce what you believe is true, what the direction you've chosen is. Okay, so think of these three strands: rational, experiential, social. Why do I believe in Jesus' resurrection? It's very simple. I first thought it through, researched it historically, looked at the body of evidence, and came to believe that there's reasons. There's intellectual, substantive reasons to believe he rose from the dead. And they're compelling. The historical evidence is extremely compelling, and the body of evidence is a formidable opponent to every other philosophy. So Christianity, just hold on to this thought. The resurrection of Jesus, followers of Jesus, it's not a throw your brains in the trash can and believe a fairy tale mindset. The reason John is writing this book is to give us reasons, intellectual, valid logic to conclude that Jesus is God, that he rose from the dead. The second reason I have come to believe in Jesus is for the last 45 years, building on that initial belief, I have now experienced him active and present in my life, guiding, shaping, transforming, and not just in my life, but in my family, my extended family. I could tell you where I would be had I not met Jesus, and it's not a good place, okay? And I can tell you, and I could keep you here all day telling you how very personally active he's been in my life. So you could never convince me that Jesus is not real just on these two basic premises. Number one is the logic and the evidence, and number two is I have experienced him personally. You could no sooner convince me that Jesus is not real than you could convince me that Connecticut pizza is not delicious. I've experienced it. I don't care what you think. So once we've got good reason and a solid experience, we really do have generally a strong faith. But then I could tell you this, I've seen him not only active in my life, I've seen him active in grace-shaped communities called churches most of my life. Not as a pastor, but as a kid growing up in church. With parents who were flawed, with a church family that was flawed, people that were deeply broken, but whose faith was real, and the presence and work of Jesus was real in their life. So I've been watching him at work in transforming others' lives who would be miserable and destitute without him too. And so the community and the social aspect has completely reinforced that belief. But let me ask you this, why do people disbelieve? Why do they arrive at an equally strong unbelief? And I would say, well, it's really to say it's not to say they disbelieve, it's simply that they've come to believe in something else. Okay, so they've decided not to believe in the body of evidence, not to put Jesus to the test of experience personally, and not to study the community life of believers. They've pulled out of that and they've said, no, I believe this instead. But nonetheless, that belief is still built on reason, experience, and community. By the way, we want to be careful about the middle strand because that's where emotion would fit as well. And you don't ever want to go or build your life on emotional belief. Let me explain to you what that would be like. That would be like having a tooth that's rotting in my head and needing a root canal to save the tooth, but then emotionally not wanting to go to the dentist. So I just go, I'm going to ignore it. I don't want that to be true. Now you tell me, if I need a root canal and I don't want a root canal, does that heal my tooth? No, I still have a truth of decay in my life. So we got to be careful about emotional belief. We really want rational belief that is then substantiated experientially, and then we want to surround ourselves with people that hold on to that same truth. But let me add this before we jump into the story. When someone's faith falls apart, I'm talking about their faith in Jesus. We all know somebody that used to believe, that used to go to church. Where does it usually fall apart? Well, it's usually not that they stop believing that Jesus rose from the dead. It's usually number 3. Somebody in the church hurt them. They had a bad church experience. Somebody took advantage. Somebody cheated them. Somebody lied to them. And they drew a straight line from that church hurt me to I don't believe anymore. And what they've done is they've said, because that person's a jerk, I don't believe Jesus rose from the dead, which is not a logical sequence. It's an emotional sequence. And it says that your faith was built on kind of pragmatic behaviors of people instead of substantive reality. Did God visit the planet, and did Jesus raise from the dead? So what I want you to do is see in John 20, the account of the resurrection, Jesus addresses all 3 of these strands. John, by God's inspiration, addresses all 3 of these strands of belief. In other words, he doesn't expect you to have a blind faith, an emotional faith, or a non-substantive faith. He's going to give you the core of all 3 of these things if you want them. If you're willing to let Jesus validate himself to you, he will. So, 3 looks into the tomb. They're going to drive right at those 3 strands of belief. Are you ready? Okay, come on now. Come on, here we go. Number 1, a skeptic's look reveals a rational case for supernatural, transcendent, spiritual reality. Now, I realize that's a long statement, and there's some thick words there. So let me break it down for a second. A skeptic's look. First, we're going to talk about the doubter, the skeptic, the disbeliever, the unbeliever, the atheist, or just the person that's in the mushy middle that's never really landed on a kind of belief that affects them in any way. It has no practical, life-shaping value in their life. So, like, that's a belief that has no point to it. Okay, I can believe pizza's good, but if I never eat it, what does it matter? What does it matter what I believe about the pizza, right? So, real belief is a changing kind of force in your life. A skeptic's look into the tomb reveals rationality, intellectual evidence, a case for supernaturality, for things beyond our understanding, for transcendent spiritual reality, that there's something beyond this life, that you are more than a body, that there is a spiritual reality that's more than material and physical and natural. Now, let's pick up the story in verse 1. And what I want you to see in these first 10 verses is not only the story, but I want you to see that all of Jesus' first followers were this. They were skeptics. They were doubters, okay? So verse 1. The first day of the week comes Mary Magdalene. Magdalene was the village where she lived. Early, when it was yet dark, unto the sepulchre or tomb, and seeth the stone taken away. Now pause, think through this, play it out in your mind. Mary is going to prepare the body of Jesus. She expects to have someone move the stone. When she sees the stone is rolled away, she doesn't think, oh, he's alive. That's the last thought that she would ever think. Okay. So she sees the stone rolled away, then she runneth and cometh to Simon Peter. So she sees the stone, panics, fear, anxiety, confusion, perplexity. Now remember, this is a follower of Jesus. She knows him well. But now she's afraid, she's perplexed, she's confused. You ever been there? So she runs. She doesn't know what to do, so she runs. She runs to the disciples, Simon Peter, and you'll see verse 2 where it says, and to the other disciple. That's how John refers to himself all the way through his gospel. To the other disciple. He never says his first name or himself. He just says to the other disciple. And by the way, you're going to see here, this is kind of fun. Peter and John were very competitive with each other. Do you have a coworker that just is always competing with you? Peter and John were always at each other, okay? They always wanted to outdo each other. They always wanted to be closer to Jesus. So look at what John says. And the other disciple whom Jesus loved. Jesus, he liked Peter, but he loved me. John thinking, I didn't deny him like Peter did. See, John's the one that tells us the big, long story about Peter's denial. He was having fun writing that one out. Because he stood there and watched it happen. He followed Jesus into that meeting with Caiaphas. That's a long story. I don't have time to go through that. But anyway, so he says, so the other disciple whom Jesus loved. And Mary says to them, They've taken away the Lord out of the sepulcher, and we know not where they've laid him. I want you to catch it again. Jesus is dead in Mary's mind. She's not thinking resurrection. Now, frankly, they should have been. They should have expected him to resurrect. He's been telling them for weeks and weeks he's going to resurrect. He resurrected Lazarus. Why wouldn't they? If he can do it to Lazarus, why not himself? Why wouldn't they put that together? This is how skeptical they were. Even though they believed in Jesus' identity, they didn't believe in his resurrection. It's amazing. And it shows you the nature of faith. And it shows you why Jesus said, start with a mustard seed. Start with a little faith. Believe what you can, and let me grow it from there. He takes even the smallest faith. So these disciples are like, we believe in who he is, but we don't believe in what he says or what he's going to do. We don't believe he's going to come back to life. So they're really skeptical. Look at verse 3. Peter, therefore, went forth, and that other disciple, there he goes again, and came to the sepulcher. Look at verse 4. This one's great. So they both ran together, and the other disciple did outrun Peter. Like, what does that have to do with anything? So me and Peter ran to the tomb. Oh, by the way, I beat him. I'm thinking that through. I'm like, Peter's got to live with that forever. That's the word of God. Well, here's what's ironic. John is a very old man. He's the longest living apostle, so Peter beat him to heaven. So I imagine when John got to heaven, Peter's like, nah, I got here before you. You beat me to the tomb, but I beat you here, you know. But John's like, yeah, but your loss is recorded forever as the words of God. So I imagine that they're still at each other a little bit, but all in fun. Verse 5. Well, Peter came first to the sepulcher. John came first to the sepulcher. Verse 5, and he stooping down, looked in, saw the linen clothes lying, yet went not in. Then comes Peter following him, and went into the sepulcher, and seeth the linen clothes lie, and the napkin that was about his head not lying with the linen clothes, but wrapped together in a place by itself. Do you see the forensic analysis that these guys are doing right now? They're not going, oh, he must be alive. Wonder where he is. They're not going, yay. They're going, okay, what happened here? What's going on? They're investigating. And John is helping you do the investigation. And by the way, these realities were all validatable with other people. The people that experienced these were in much of the story are alive at the time and could be asked. So verse 8, then went in also that other disciple, which came first to the sepulcher, and he saw, I love John again, nobody believed but me. Everybody didn't believe, but that disciple believed. Okay, we'll go with it, John. For as yet they knew not the scripture that he must rise again. Then the disciples went away again unto their own home. That one always intrigues me too. So play it out. They go to the tomb. It's open. It's a mess. Stuff, remnants. They're trying to figure out what happened. They can't figure out what happened. Their assumption is he's dead, and they don't know where he is. And they don't know what to do. So what do? I guess we'll just go home. I don't know why I find that funny, but I find that hilarious. Like, they just go home. It's so plain. It's so uneventful. We're sitting here going, guys, he's alive. What are you doing going home? And they're dejected, they're confused, they're perplexed, they're displaced, their dreams are dashed, they're thinking in a fog. They just go home. Why didn't Jesus more fabulously announce his resurrection? I mean, again, if it were me, I'd want to like, ta-da, here I am, boo, I'm alive. No, I think he's lovingly, gently leading them through their own skepticism. He's giving them time to think it out, think it through. He's gradually unveiling himself to them. My friends, I just want to state a case here. There's a rationality to faith. In fact, everybody has faith. Everybody has faith. There's this idea out there that, those Christians, those followers of Jesus, they have faith, but that's because they've thrown their brains into the trash can and they don't have reason. Us atheists, naturalists, whatever, we've got reason. No, listen. Everybody on the most empirical questions lands on faith. Why? Because it can't be proven. Let me give an example. If you don't believe that Jesus rose from the dead and that he's God, that he conquered death and wants to give you new life forever, about your only other alternative is something called a Big Bang. Right? Guys there? So if you ask a scientist or an evolutionist, okay, let's say I buy into your Big Bang thing, like what made the bang? What made the molecules? How'd they come together? Their only answer is we don't know. So let me tell you where they're at. They believe that nothing exploded to create everything. And that's called faith. That's not just faith, that's like radical, crazy, like insane faith. I don't have that much faith. That nothing created everything. And I heard one scientist say this week, no, they believe that nothing created everything, and then there's a second supernatural miracle that happened in the Big Bang ideology, that life spontaneously generated. And it found someone to marry and started recreating. That's just insane. It's unprovable. It's not science, it's religion. It is a religion, and it is the most popular religion of our culture, and it's being forced. It is religion being forced down our throats and the throats of our kids in their classes. But it's faith, because it is impossible to empirically prove, and it's radical faith. But listen, it's faith, it's also supernatural. Supernaturality is rational, and no matter where you land, you got to land on supernaturality, because a Big Bang out of nothing is pretty supernatural. And life spontaneously generating is pretty supernatural. So either way, I hate to be the bearer of bad news if you're an unbeliever in Jesus. You're just a believer in something else that's maybe even more radical faith than it takes to believe in Jesus. We're all in the same boat. We are creatures of faith. And there's a rationality to transcendence. Transcendence is the idea that there's life after death. There's more to you than meat. There's more to you than a body, that you are actually a soul, that you are spiritual in nature, the core substance of you. Let me tell you one of many little evidences that science can't explain. Why do you so fear? Why is death so unnatural? Because if evolution is true, death would be natural. The strong eat the weak, survival of the fittest, that's evolution. But death is not natural. We don't want death. Why? And nobody can explain this. Because you were made to live. You weren't made to die. Death entered with sin on the planet, and in God's creation fell, and death came upon all men, and it's like cancer. It's a cancer that's in us that's not supposed to be. That's why it's unnatural. So rationality to faith, supernaturally transcendence. So the skeptic that looks into the empty tomb has to wrestle with this, okay? But I want you to see the second look quickly, and that is a believer's look. So now we're going to move from the skeptic who needs the intelligent information, and there's plenty of it. Let's move to the believer and see that a believer's look offers a personal, transformational encounter with the living Jesus. So this is that second strand of belief. Okay, Pastor, if I jump over the first hurdle, that faith is reasonable, supernaturality is reasonable, transcendence is reasonable, and that Jesus very well could be God who rose from the dead, where does that take me now? Now it takes you to you needing to meet him, and him bearing the burden of revealing himself to you personally. Well, does he do that? Well, look at verse 11. So the disciples go back home. I bet they really regretted that after this. Watch what happens next. But Mary stood without the sepulchre, the tomb. And what's she doing, church? She's weeping. I want you to picture this. Mary again. There's no life in this story yet. In Mary's mind, she does not expect a living Jesus. He's dead, and he's always going to be dead, and she's broken, and she's devastated. And now they've taken the body, which is even more devastating because she can't have the closure she wanted to have by preparing that body for burial, as was tradition. So she stoops down, she looks into the tomb, her eyes blurry with tears, her emotions foggy with despair. She's going to see and talk to two angels and not even recognize that they're angels. That's how emotionally detached she is. I would have freaked out. Mary literally is going to have a normal, like human exchange conversation with angels. She says, at verse 12, to see his two angels in white sitting, one at the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. And they said to her, woman, why weepest thou? And she said to them, again, no emotion, because they've taken away my Lord, and I know not where they've laid him. And when she had thus said, she turned herself back. So now she doesn't know she doesn't see that they're angels, which is remarkable. It seems to me that it's pretty evident that they were. She's so detached and displaced, disoriented, so confused, perplexed, sorrow. She turns away to walk away, and in despair, it's over. And look at what happens next. She turned herself back and saw Jesus standing. Now, there's a lot of conjecture about why she didn't recognize Jesus, that maybe he didn't permit her to understand. None of that is in the text, so we don't really know. But she didn't recognize the angels either, which to me just tells me what her mental state really was. She's probably not even looking up. She's probably looking at the ground, seeing his feet, and she just assumes, again, she doesn't assume that it's Jesus. She doesn't assume he's alive. She assumes this must be the gardener. She turned herself, saw Jesus standing, and knew not that it was Jesus. Verse 15. And Jesus says to her, woman, why weepest thou? Whom seekest thou? Again, why didn't he say, Mary, it's me? Shocker. Why didn't he? Maybe he didn't want to freak her out. Maybe he didn't, maybe he's just gently unveiling the reality of himself to her like he does with all of us. Maybe he's leading her through her own disbelief and confusion to clarity. But then there's this moment. Verse 16, look at it. Jesus saith unto her, Mary. And that's the moment. She hears that word, Mary. He knows my name. I know that voice who says my name that way. And Jesus reveals himself personally to Mary. Listen, I know Jesus, and he'll do the same for you. The question here is not, is she going to understand who he is? The question here, especially at this point, is she willing to believe the impossible? You see, in Mary's cognitive world, this is not possible. And so up to this moment, every other option is on the table except for Jesus is alive. And listen, why didn't Mary assume this was a hallucination? Why didn't she think it was a metaphysical vision or she was dreaming? Why did she immediately take this for what it was, a literal, physical, bodily, alive again appearance of Jesus to her? Why did she take it that way? Because she was willing to. There's a lot of people on the planet that if that happened to them, they would have ruled it out as a metaphysical experience, a hallucination, a vision, a drug trip, too much pizza last night, something else going on. It can't be real. I've got to be dreaming. I'm having an out-of-body experience. This isn't. And they would have ruled out. See, unbelief is dangerous. Because when you are staunch in unbelief, you can see all the evidence in the world and still dismiss it, excuse it away, reason it away. We're about the only creature that God created that has the power to logic, to reason ourselves out of valid evidence. And that's an emotional kind of belief. You'll talk to atheists that I've quoted them before. They say, I'm an atheist because I don't want God to exist. That's an emotional conclusion. Jordan Peterson, I've played a quote where he says, he believes in God now, but he said, I was an atheist, but what he would say is, I'm an atheist, but I'm afraid God might exist. That's an emotional place to be. So Jesus reveals himself personally to Mary, and she turns herself and she says to him, Rabboni, which is to say, Master. She immediately wants to fall down and worship him. Jesus says, touch me not, I'm not yet ascended to my Father. And the sense of that is, we're going to have more time together. And he says to her, go to my brethren. I love this. Go to my brethren and say to them, I ascend to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. So Mary, verse 18, look, now track this. Strand one, reason, empty tomb, stone, reason, it's all there. personal experience, strand 2. He's there. He's talking to me. He's physically here. Mary's belief is now strong. She's moved in a moment from disbelief or weak belief to total belief, okay? She runs to the disciples. She says, I've seen the Lord, and he's spoken these things unto me, and unto her, it says. Let me ask you this before we go to the third thought. Have you given Jesus the opportunity to prove himself to you personally? Let me tell you what his death and his resurrection means. What does it reveal to you? What does Jesus want you to know? Number one, that we are all judicially guilty before God. It's called sin. Secondly, that we are invited into forgiveness only through him. His death on the cross and his resurrection provides the only antidote for our sin, our problems with God, and forgiveness. And that through that forgiveness, you can have reconciliation with God and a relationship with him, a personal relationship with God as friend and Father, Savior, King, Lord, but guide in your life. And that when you have that relationship through Jesus with God by faith, belief alone, you then enter into your truest identity and your truest life story. Why? Because you now have a relationship with your Creator. We live in an identity-stricken, an identity-panicked, an identity-thirsty world. And the narratives of our culture are, go find yourself, go reinvent yourself, go emasculate yourself until you find who you really are, go experiment with yourself. And God says you'll never find yourself until you find your Creator, because your Creator knows who you are. And your Creator knows why you are. So when you meet Jesus, you get a strong identity, you get a strong purpose, you get abundant life, you get forever life with him. 12 years ago, I was diagnosed with cancer, 5 parts of my chest. That was bad news. It was going to kill me. And I had a decision to make. Nothing relating to my behavior was going to change the existence of this cancer. I could not behave my way back to health. I needed a radical intervention, a radical medical intervention. My doctor said to me, well, I have bad news, you've got cancer, but I have good news. This was 6 weeks later. The kind of cancer you have, we can cure. Now, you think I got mad at the doctor? How dare you tell me I've got cancer? No. I was glad for the diagnosis because I wanted the truth, and I was more glad for the cure. Now, here's the deal. I've got a simple decision. Do I believe the doctor, and will I receive the treatment? Simple. And I had lots of people giving me alternative treatments. I had friends sending me herbs and special, recipes, and people telling me to fly to Mexico and get this treatment and that treatment, and don't do chemo, and don't, self-appointed professionals in my life that were trying to save my life, and they would have surely killed me. I'd been dead a long time ago. But I made a decision based on rational evidence, based on my experience with my doctor, to believe the doctor and receive the treatment. So I went in, hooked up, chemo, radiation. A year later, I was cancer-free. Thank the Lord. And here we are 12 years later, and I'm thankful for God extending my life. Thank you, but you're eating up my time. All right. Tacking that on the end. Okay. But here's my point. Logic, experience, community. I got online. I found out lots of people that had my cancer lived. The community reinforced my belief all of a sudden, and God cured me. But I really simply believed and received. I believed the diagnosis, and I received. So my friend, the gospel of Jesus and his death, burial, and resurrection is how God judges the cancer of your sinfulness without judging or condemning you in the process. Like the doctor said, chemo and radiation is how we're going to kill cancer without killing you. God says Jesus and the resurrection is how I'm going to kill sin without killing you. And by the way, he's the only cure. So if you reject Jesus, you reject the only cure. I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm trying to be truthful to you. I'm trying to tell you the truth like my doctor told me. Some people get mad about this. How dare you tell me I'm a sinner? How dare you tell me? Why are you? I didn't get mad at my doctor when he said I had cancer. Nobody in this room is perfect. Nobody. We've all offended God. We've all broken his laws. And God killed his son to put your guilt on his son. God became a man to die for you, to give you life and forgiveness. The only barrier between you and God is not your behavior. You see, if you think the barrier between you and God is behavior, some of you think you've made it. You've behaved really well, and you could never behave that well. That's impossible. It's impossible. So if you think you're good enough for God to forgive you, erase that thought. The Bible says you'll never be that good. The others of you, if behavior is the barrier, you're like, well, I have no hope. I've been really bad. So I can never go to heaven. I can never have God. And you're wrong too. Because you can never be so bad that God wouldn't forgive you. You're never so good you don't need a Savior. You're never so bad you can't have a Savior. Because it's not about behavior. It's about belief. The only barrier between you and God is your willingness to believe or not. To believe or receive, or to believe in something else. Those are your options. I want you to see quickly the third look, and that is a disciple's look. The last part of this story is so cool. A disciple's look, now I got these long sentences today, so let me read it to you. A disciple's look provides a nurturing, lifetime experience in a community of grace. This was my favorite part of preparing for this message, although I love the first two parts. This part captivated me in a new way. Never saw this before as long as I've been studying the resurrection message and story. Now, before we read it, I want to say this. I imagine if I got this microphone and just allowed it to go around the room and said, share your bad church experience, we'd be here a long time. There's a lot of people in the world who have been hurt at church. There's a lot of people that could share some pretty broken church stories. And I want to tell you something. I'm one of them. You say, well, you're the pastor. This is all self-serving to you. You just want us to be a part of the church. No, I'm a kid that grew up in church. Stop looking at me like a pastor for a minute. I'm a kid that my dad was a salesman, my mom was a legal secretary, and I grew up, and there was a moment, now we weren't in church for a long time, and there was a moment where we met Jesus, and he brought us into a community of grace. If I took the microphone and told you my bad church stories, they would be stories of abuse, abandonment, mistreatment, slander, adultery, embezzlement. I mean, I could go through. And I could tell you, I've been part of 4 or 5 churches in my lifetime. I could tell you horror stories that make you get up and walk out right now. You see, here's the thing. We are all desperately broken. Me and you. If you knew really my issues, you would never listen to me preach. And if I knew your issues, I would never try to preach to you. Because we are both in the same boat. The operable thing, the operable dynamic right here in this moment, in this room, is the Spirit of God, the truth of God, in the midst of very broken, struggling, growing people. So if your faith is built on strand 3, a perfect church, get ready for your faith to completely fall apart in a short time. But the thing is, in that journey of broken church experiences, and by the way, those are the loudest people on social media. I don't trust organized religion, my church, this, my pastor, my this. Okay, yeah, humanity is bad, but Jesus is still good. And the silent majority are people like you that are growing up in grace-saturated, gospel-centered churches, and whose story is, yeah, of course we are broken people. Of course we have to forgive each other and forbear each other. Of course we navigate complex and difficult situations. And of course marriages fall apart and people have bad problems that come to church. Of course. But we belong to a great Savior, and we have a community of great grace, and we have a long runway of spiritual growth. So I want you to see this in verse 19. This is one of the earliest iterations of the church. The same day, the day of the resurrection, at evening, this was the evening service, okay? Being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut, where the disciples were assembled for what? Say it out loud. What brought them together? They're scared. Man, I'm telling you, I read this and I'm like, this is every Sunday. This happens every Sunday. Why do we come to church? Well, some of you come because you ought to or are supposed to. You have that kind of legalistic mindset. Some of you come because you just really want to and can't wait. But a lot of us come because we are scared out of our minds and the week was hard. And we need some hope. And that's why they're gathering. That's why they're assembling. This is a hard week and we're afraid. What happens while they're assembled? So they're assembled for the fear of the Jews. Next two words, came Jesus and stood in the midst. That happens every Sunday at Emmanuel. You don't see him, but he's here. And what did Jesus say to these fearful, confused, perplexed disciples? By the way, that's just kind of a freaky thought, by the way. All of a sudden, he's standing there in the middle of them. He says to them, peace be unto you. Hey, think about the spirit, the heart, the mind of Christ. The first thing he says to them is, peace. Like, chill. Relax. Hey, guys, catch your breath. It's not as bad as you think it is, and it's a lot better than you ever imagined it would be. I'm alive. This happens in church. It should. Verse 20, I love this. When he so said, he showed them his hands and his side. Does that bring back the remembrance? Every Sunday, we look at the wounds again. We remember Jesus again. Then, what's the outcome? Then were the disciples, what's the word? Oh, they moved from fear to joy. Why? Because they gathered in fear, met with Jesus, found out peace is available, things aren't as bad, he's still in control, things are better than they thought, and they are glad. And then what does he do? He says in verse 21, my Father sent me, I'm sending you. Now they get purpose. They move from fear and panicked paralysis to joy, confidence, courage, encouragement. Listen, in verse 19, these guys are sitting there wringing their hands, and here's what they're saying. What's Putin gonna do next? What's gas prices gonna do next? What's the economy gonna do next? What's my 401k gonna do next? I've lost 20%, 20%. What are we gonna do? What's the housing market gonna do next? That's what they're doing. And they gather, and Jesus shows them a different view. That's church. Gave them the Holy Ghost, verse 22. Gave them the responsibility to communicate the message of forgiveness, verse 23. Verse 24, look at this. But Thomas missed church that day. You ever ask yourself why Thomas didn't believe? Because he wasn't there. I get it. I'm not trying to. Now you're going, Pastor, you're picking on me and it's almost lunchtime. All right, hang on. Indulge me. I'm trying to help you see a view of what happens in this place that is so good for your heart, that you need it more than twice or three times a year. You need it more than every other month or every other week. Thomas wasn't there, so Thomas doesn't experience peace, joy, confidence, gladness. Thomas is still lost in the perplexity and confusion. Thomas is still drinking from the news feed. Thomas is still working on scrambling on how he's going to put gas in his tank next week. All the other disciples are going, he's alive. What could possibly be wrong with anything? He's alive. Total different mindset. Why? Because they gathered and met with Jesus. So Thomas has got to wait till next Sunday. And he goes to church the next Sunday. The disciples say, we've seen the Lord. And Thomas says, I don't believe. You guys are drinking your bathwater. No way. Till I stick my fingers through the holes in his hands, I'll never believe. Jesus shows up the next time they gather. Hey, Thomas. Thomas goes, my Lord and my God. And he falls down. I'm telling you. Let me wrap it up this way. I want to read what I've written because I thought it through. We long to be durably and unconditionally loved. We need inclusion and belonging. We desire to discover our true identity and to become our true selves, grow. We yearn for meaningful purpose and significance in life, and we innately desire and need to relate with Jesus and others who love him. This is the need of my soul and yours, and we ignore our souls to our own peril and to the peril of those you love. And yes, what I'm saying is church attendance is good for your soul. Why? Because a healthy church, even though there's problems and troubles and forbearance and forgiveness, in a healthy church, we love like a family, forgiving, forbearing, loving. We feed like a flock. We feast on life-shaping truth every week. We grow like a garden. And missing a lot means we're slowing our personal growth. We function like a body, a human body that the systems care for itself and nurture itself. The body life is a caring, functioning body. And we labor like a team because as he sent them, he sends us. And we experience great joy in loving and serving others. There were 100 people here yesterday conducting an extravaganza hunt for 1,500 guests. And they're the happiest people running around this campus, eating candy, wearing t-shirts that say EBC Kids. They had a blast. So my friends, to the skeptic, faith in Jesus is both rational and wonderful. To the believer, faith grows as you continue to experience him personally. To the disciple, faith goes viral when you commit yourself to a nurturing community of grace. Jesus said this, "He that heareth my word and believeth on him that sent me hath everlasting life, shall not come into condemnation, but is passed from death unto life." Let's pray together. God, thank you. Thank you for your truth. Thank you for your resurrection. Well, Jesus promised those who would trust him, believe in him, that not only would he be resurrected, but he would resurrect them in the last day. When you place faith in Jesus, the death that Jesus defeated no longer has power over you. What a wonderful and amazing reality. So friend, if you haven't received Jesus, I hope you will. And if you have, you can celebrate Jesus. You can celebrate that your best life is yet to come. Thanks for joining me for part 10. We'll see you next time, part 11. And until then, have a great day.